All right, good afternoon, and welcome to Stuck Together, Stuck Apart, Family Success During Quarantine. Hello, Kammy, Kelton, how are you?
I'm well, Eric. It's good to see you.
Good to be doing this again.
Yes.
And lots of friends and people we don't know on this call. Hello to you out there. Want to just say a little bit about the Vermont Center for Family Studies. We exist to help people solve family challenges, to foster family leadership based on the wonderful tools in Bowen family systems theory. And as you know, we're going to be talking today about quarantine parenting. And I just wanted to say something, Kammy, when I was just before I was getting ready to do this, I went for a little walk. I took my dog for a walk and I saw these two owls. Unusual to see two together, but they were kind of interacting. They were flying around, and I wondered if what they were engaged in is a territoriality dance.
Oh, interesting.
And I remembered years ago I heard a scientist, and he was talking about wildebeests, and he just showed the very simple finding from careful study of wildebeests in the wild that they're very sensitive to how much space they have from each other. And that if you shrink the space that a group of wildebeest has, it's just very simple, the conflict level goes up.
Yeah. And those owls are not in quarantine like we are.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that that's something that's happening as we're all in much more close quarters with each other so much more of the time.
Yep.
The level of tension rises. It's predictable.
There's three major stressors, obviously, that are hitting people. And I think they hit families in different ways. Some are more feeling a health threat. Some are feeling a financial threat. Ernie Pomelo, who runs Pomelo Real Estate, who's sponsoring this, told me he has 50 clients who can't pay their mortgage.
Wow.
So there's a great deal of financial uncertainty out there. And then the other one is disruption to routine, which includes how much space people are used to getting from each other.
Absolutely. And one of the things I'm aware of is that this situation is not breaking evenly for people, that some families are under much more stress and strain than other families. And I've been holding that in awareness as I talk to different people. And I think it's just a helpful piece of perspective. And that, like,
you're really on the front lines more than I am. And I've been hearing from many therapists that it's very difficult to be practicing via video. It's more stressful, and your clients are more stressed. Kammy Kelton is a longtime therapist in private practice in Central Vermont, and she's on our faculty at the Vermont Center for Family Studies. What are you seeing in terms of some of the more stressed end of the spectrum?
Oh, I'm seeing people, as this goes on longer, I'm seeing people's stress levels rise in general. And that gets exhibited in a number of ways that I think won't be surprising to people. Some people are becoming more depressed. Some people are struggling with the togetherness and trying to combine their own work with parenting and then the responsibility of their children learning at home. People really struggling with the uncertainty of how this will continue to unfold, and the ways in which people often manage themselves and their life is through planning and being able to plan for things. And people are very stressed with not being able to do that to the degree that they're used to. They don't know what summer will look like or fall. So that's a lot of what I'm seeing.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I introduce you, Erik, for anybody that's a little unfamiliar with you. So Erik's a leadership development psychologist and executive leadership development coach. He volunteers his time as the executive director of VCFS in the spare time when he's not working in his consulting firm, which is Thompson Leadership Development. So that's in case there's anybody on that doesn't know you, Erik.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw an article in the New York Times someone shared with me about, it was an article of highlighting parents who are pulling their hair out, basically. And I thought it was interesting. The focus of the article was on how difficult it is to deal with online classroom. But I was thinking, you know, I just wonder what percentage of that distress is really the disruption in the family's level of space that they have from each other. And, you know, the school system can be a convenient scapegoat for,
yes.
You know.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. What's the family process around that?
So I'm really looking forward to, Kammy has presented some slides and a presentation on quarantine parenting. And I just noticed I'm still sharing my screen. With this specific theme, launching offspring by launching yourself. Just before going into that, I wanted to highlight for a moment our professional training program, which we're accepting applications until June 1st for. And I would like to, in a moment, just ask you, Kammy, just to say, 30 seconds on your experience of this professional training program. But basically what this is it's designed for helpers and for people who really want to get a deep dive into this really unique skill set or toolkit that's available within Bowen Family Systems theory to understand the fundamental processes that drive what goes on in families by understanding how I participate in them. And so anybody who has the ability to see, okay, I've got a complex problem or I've got a high stakes relationship puzzle I'm dealing with right now, could be a couples issue, could be a child you're worried about, could be all kinds of a symptomatic family member, conflict among generations. Anybody who's able to break that puzzle down and see it as less personal and having to do largely with the way people are responding to the challenge and how they're interacting with each other. And then to go that one more step and say, how am I participating in that interaction process that's driving this problem? That is a pearl. Anyone who's developed the ability to find those pearls is a family leader. And that's what we're doing. We're training helpers to learn that skill set. You want to put anything? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's very much been my experience in the 3-year effort in this training program. It's been invaluable to me. And I've been in this field a long time, like 3 decades. And I would say that it has really added incredible value to my personal life and my professional life. And that there's so much between the two of those. My focus in the training program has been to really examine and learn Bowen theory through applying it to my own family. And in doing so, it's given me probably the most clinical benefit of anything I've ever done professionally. So that's been my experience of this training program. It's been invaluable. And
we're happy to, if you're curious about it, we want to get about 15, 20 people in this year's program. Happy to have conversations about that. So let's pivot over and talk about parenting, quarantine parenting.
Okay. I'm going to, let's see if I can get this going. I'd like to start with a slide that I'm going to show you all. Let's see. Oopsie, hang on a second. So the slide I'm going to start with is a basic genogram slide. It's called One Family Story, but it really is my own story. And I'd like to just orient you to the genogram for those of you who are a little less familiar with them. That in this, actually, let me just stop for a second and set this up so that it's presenter. Yeah, let me try that. Are you guys seeing the slides on the side or not?
Yeah, we can see them. You can
Okay.
put it up in the top left corner if
Yep.
you hit, yeah. There you go.
Hit from beginning?
You should work, yeah.
Thank you for your patience. This the slide, the PowerPoint stuff is still a little new to me. So,
Looks great.
okay, thank you. This is my family. In a genogram, men are squares and women are, males are squares and females are circles. And the top square is my husband and the circle across is me. And then down below are our son and our daughter. And very generally, this story is one in which the dynamic that I will share that I think is relevant for today's discussion is a dynamic in which a reciprocal process in my marriage in raising our children, where my husband's focus on work and building a business and kind of distancing in the marriage a little bit through that process, my reciprocation to that was to channel my anxiety about that into focusing on children. This is not an uncommon story at all. I think many people have a variation of this story in their own families. So in that, distancing and accommodating dynamic, I became, more focused on my children than I think was helpful a lot of the time. And this was something that ebbed and flowed in its intensity over the years. The two lines directed between myself and my son indicate that there was probably a more intense anxiety or intense child focus on him than there was for my daughter. And there are a couple of different reasons for that. The short of it is that in my family I grew up in, there was a generational pattern of a belief that men are a little bit more vulnerable. There was a little bit more anxious focus on boys. So that continued down through my experience of parenting with my son. And he also had some learning challenges which I think heightened my focus on him. And the intensity was much less so with my daughter, leaving her a little bit more freed up in her own growth and development. So as my children were getting older and well into high school and getting ready to launch for college, I really began thinking about, this is more of a mess than I want it to be. And I want to clean up my mess, my little bit of a mess. And I started thinking about really the pattern of interactions that were happening, what my role in this process has been. And it happened to be kind of at the same time that I found the Bowen training program and really helped me to think about this process. And it's of trying to step out of my role of over-focus on children and so much fixing for them. And it was a several-year process. And even though my children are well into their 20s, there are pieces of this process that are still ongoing. So the theory has been quite helpful in continuing that process. If I move to the next slide, I will share a little bit about the detail of some of what I worked on. And again, it's called A Mother's Effort to Launch, that I really think this process was not about launching my children so much as it was about launching myself. So I think about some things, the way that I was sort of operating with my children and in my family system, and moving from some of those habits and tendencies and moving towards some others. The first being moving from anxious monitoring and fixing in my relationship with my children to moving towards observing and managing self. Really stepping back, and instead of kind of jumping in, I would work to pause and just think about what I was observing. And just that effort helped me to slow down and calm down. And I would just try to take a look at what are my interactions with my children. I had a tendency to be quite agenda driven in them. And it was kind of humbling to see how much I did that. The next thing includes a shift in my mindset from really thinking about how responsible am I feeling for others, which was quite a lot, to trying to move towards thinking about being more responsible for myself. And actually, I found quite a bit of relief in that when I started to really consider that as my children get older, I don't want to have so much responsibility for them. I want to be freed up from that. And that provided quite a bit of relief. Another aspect was moving from having a vote, what I call having a vote, versus having an opinion. And what this really speaks to is that as children grow up, there becomes a shift in parental authority, doesn't there? We perhaps can have an opinion about anything we want regarding them, but we start to not have as much of a vote on certain things. You know, as my children left home, I didn't get a say in all of the decisions that they were making, even if I, didn't approve of them. It was really, recognizing that maybe I don't need to be as involved in their decision making all the time. Perhaps they have the capacity to make their decisions without my being involved in that as much.
I love this point about, the management of losing your voting rights as a parent.
Yes. Yeah. That is not easy, let me tell you. And it still can come up. I can catch myself,
Can you remember one example where, you had sort of trying to exercise voting rights that you had lost or something like that? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think one thing came to mind when my daughter was off at college her first year, and she started talking about not coming home for the summer, and she went to school very far away, out on the West Coast, and so that was a difficult one to not feel like I had a vote on, which I didn't, but that one got out in front of me.
Reminds me of something Mike Kerr said years ago. Dr. Mike Kerr, author of Bone Theory Secrets, 2019, wonderful book. He said that in many cases in families, the issue isn't what we're deciding, it's who gets to decide.
That's a great...
Who gets to decide can become very charged up with tension.
Yes.
So
yes.
Here you have someone sort of managing that shifting landscape successfully.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And just in terms of that same thing with my daughter, 4 years later in her last year of school, she was in a relationship with a young man that we got to meet, and I had these concerns about that relationship, and I was able to navigate that so much better by that point in time. I was able to not be overly directive and not oversharing my thoughts about that, and just kind of letting her really direct how much she was going to talk about that or what questions she was going to raise towards me about that. And that felt so much different by that point in time. And that was not an easy thing to navigate either, but I felt like I had more of my feet under me in that process by that time. So the next thing is moving, working on moving from all kinds of directing, advising and guiding to more of a neutral stance with my children. I was really good at directing and advising and guiding. I probably could have worked on a cruise ship. And they didn't respond well to that. It created more distance. They pulled away the more I tried to do that. And so my effort was on being in contact and connection with them with less of that, less advising and directing. Can I let go of my sense of what I think is right for them? Can I let go of that a little bit more? And as I did that, it really shifted the connection to being calmer and to being closer. Another aspect was moving from a focus on concern about them to a focus on their capacity. And I think that that's something that reduced my anxiety probably the most of all of these different efforts I'm talking about, is that, I was saying to Erik yesterday when we were chatting that I have such a laser radar for anything there is to be concerned about with my kids, that if there's a concern that's a needle in a haystack, I can find it in 10 seconds. It doesn't take me long at all. So I really worked at thinking about where are they capable, and really training myself to be more of a detective for their capacity and how that would show itself. And part of that, I think, is fundamentally about learning to trust them and learning to trust myself more in the foundation that I had given them, or we had given them, and really trusting that they're so much more capable than I often gave them credit for. So another part of this was the idea of moving from being an expert on others to being an expert on myself. I think part of that is that as kids grow, they develop, and so some of their development is outside of your view, and they're growing and developing in ways you don't always witness. And so part of that, I think, is them, that's part of the process of them being their own experts, and us stepping back and thinking about how do we want to be an expert on ourselves. So this process has really, the launching of myself at the time that you're launching children, it was really a process of moving from giving up myself in my relationship with my children to rediscovering self. That it's not uncommon in families where there's, a lot of child focus for a parent to lose themselves to some degree in that relationship. And I think that certainly happened for me. And so the process of launching myself was really about turning toward my own life and rediscovering some things for myself or for my own life. What do I want my goals for my life to be at this point in time? How do I want to direct myself in my own life? So I guess the way I would sum up this process overall is that it was an effort in trying to tip the balance in my role as a parent from being less of a guide in my children's lives to more of a witness in their lives.
Wow. It's so clear. Thank you. You mentioned, let's think about this. Can you, I'm thinking, okay, it's so obvious to me how this is highly relevant right now. Mm-hmm. In quarantine, these kinds of processes probably double their value.
Yeah.
Especially with launching offspring, probably
Hmm.
age 10 to 30. I mean, there's a lot of people who have college students home.
Right.
And so there's a pressure on these processes of launching right now.
Absolutely. And I think these processes are applicable to parents who aren't on the cusp of launching as well, just some of these ideas. But yes, under these circumstances, this is really, I think, challenging. Do you think this is a good time to move to that next cycle slide, Erik? Is that?
Sure.
Yeah. So I was thinking about, the stuck togetherness right now and its impact on parenting and the launching process. And this is kind of just a little model that I came up with, where you can see the cycle of how stuck together and being in close quarters can very easily result in an over monitoring of each other. We're so much more aware of what's going on. I had a mother recently describe to me concern about her son's mood. And then in the discussion, she said, I realized that this probably happened all the time before, like these little undulations in his mood, but he was at school and I didn't see it. And so she was quite aware of, just in being closer proximity, she was observing more things than she was used to observing. And just that in and of itself would increase her parental anxiety.
It reminds me of those high-powered tests where you can discover any kind of little scrap of a tumor inside your body. Didn't used to have those tests before, but so many of those tumors are false positives. They're not growing at all.
Right. That's so interesting, that connection between, family and some biological processes, natural processes. So when parental anxiety increases, we often, as a parent, when our anxiety goes up, we often focus more on a child. So an increased child focus occurs, which often looks like helping, fixing, correcting, perhaps over serving our children in some fashion. And I think it's also important to point out that child focus can also look like too much positive attention towards a child. We often think about, it can look like enabling and fixing or reprimanding, but it can also be an overly positive focus or a sense of a child's preciousness. So the idea is, what's the intensity of attention on the child? That's how I think about when I think about child focus. What's the intensity of attention?
Versus the kind of positive negative dimension.
Yes.
So in other words, intensity or anxious positive could have the same effect of reducing psychological space, reducing psychological territory in a quarantine family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much so. And so with that increased child focus, we often, see increased child anxiety, which can look like reactivity, resistance, a child shutting down, more arguing, less cooperation. And then all of those things, again, can increase parental anxiety. And you can see the cycle, continuing or going on.
Wow, thank you. Very clear, very simple and clear. And so descriptive, I think it's probably going to be easy for anyone involved with raising kids or watching as a grandparent or as a helper who works with children to see these processes. They're deep in nature. It's so natural to focus and monitor offspring. No one has to teach most parents to do that. Right. And I think you're presenting a version of too much of a good thing here.
Yeah. So we're getting close to it. We're about at breakout time. So I want to share this slide with some reflection questions, and I will read them out loud. And what I'd really invite people to do is perhaps pick one of these questions and write it down for yourself, one that particularly speaks to you, And take that question with your reflections about it to the breakout session. And you can decide what you want to share about that. So the first question is, how can I calm myself? A calmer presence can calm a family. How might I manage myself more and others less? What are some realistic expectations of myself and others? What do I think about or what do I need to think about in terms of my control or authority with my children at this point in time? And lastly, what should I tolerate and what should I work to change?
Nice. So we'll just leave those up for a second as we orient people. Some may be on this on our web meeting. This is our third episode, and we're going to just keep going, and we'll be using the same Zoom ID number for these for the one next week. And what we're going to do is, in a moment, put you into breakout rooms for 10 minutes. And I'm going to try to set this up so that you have a timer that gives you a 1-minute countdown. But I might just ask if you kind of peek at your watch when the transition happens, you can monitor it this yourself. 10 minutes is not a lot of time, so recommend you consider don't even do introductions. The purpose of this 10 minutes is to allow people to think out loud and integrate these very interesting observations that Kammy Kelton has shared with us. And then we'll come back together and we'll do a Q&A via chat. Now, I mentioned last meeting, if you're sick of Zoom and you're tired, you could jump off now. Tired of looking at screens, that's perfectly fine for all our meetings to come in for the first half hour. But if you're looking to kind of have some interaction with people you don't know and think out loud about some of these ideas, then here's your chance coming right up. All right. Well, in your breakout room, Kammy.
We had a great discussion about a few different things. Let's see. Some discussion just of how difficult it is in close proximity to not be over monitoring kids, to not be overly concerned that we were talking about, not just in this circumstance, but just outside of this, that when children come and go from home as they're older, that people will notice being in close proximity, they can feel themselves a little more anxiously monitoring.
It's probably so important right now to be taking proximity breaks.
Yeah.
And people are doing that, going into their rooms and stuff, but taking walks, getting out away from the house probably adds a lot right now to that. So I want to welcome questions. We got about 10 minutes. And if you could just use your chat function, we can maybe hear a little bit more, Kammy, while we're waiting for questions to come in by chat. So yeah, that monitoring is just so natural.
The other thing that we talked about was how in a situation like this, that a rise in anxiety is a predictable thing. There is something to be concerned about. You know, people's sort of safety or livelihoods are you know, threatened to a certain degree, and that it can be helpful for people to understand that it would be predictable that their baseline level of anxiety would be higher during a time like this. And perhaps that might also help people to re-examine what they expect of themselves and other people, and how to think about, how do I work with just a higher level of anxiety in general at this time?
I think anxious attention is so fundamental to humans, it can be hard to even realize that you're caught in it.
Mm-hmm.
And you think it's the thing you're focusing on that stimulated the change in your attention. But it could be, as you're just saying, you know, it's for many people, it's going to be really the global anxiety storm that's stimulating the anxious attention, and then it's looking for something to focus on. Of course, it is possible for humans to not focus on something that is a real problem. So that's the other way it can work. So looks like we have a question come in, and I just, for those of you not familiar, down at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat button. And if you click that, you can type in a question, and we can think about it. How does one discern? Here's the first one I see. How does one discern what to tolerate and what to work to change?
Wow.
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
So fundamental.
Mm.
I think in a way, you think about it, that is just a great question to have on the table. I think many times people are making decisions about what they're going to try to change without really slowing down to strategically decide whether or not this is something I need to try to change.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, the answer to the question in a way is just to have the question, I think. But do you have any other thoughts about that?
I think that would be my general response as well. I think with all of those reflection questions, and from my own experience with any of those, it was really holding the question in mind that helped me to move from an emotional reaction place to a slowing down and giving myself some time to think place. And that in doing that, I could often come up with a direction I wanted to head in. I don't think there's a specific particular answer to that question that was posed, but that entertaining and holding a question in mind can be part of what guides us.
I think it may be a useful question for many people, and this is certainly true of parenting, but it could also be a couple, or lots of, like, I thought your slides about moving from this to that, that's a great slide for couples as well. A good question for many people is, are the efforts I'm making to change this productive? Are they getting the outcome that I'm looking for, or am I trying to find a bigger hammer when the smaller hammers haven't worked?
Right. So you're kind of,
no, go ahead.
You're hinting at that process might start as a bit of an exploration. Maybe you don't know whether something is to be tolerated or changed, but you decide to pick a lane and see what happens, and see where it leads to, or if it's an effective or productive direction.
And then on the tolerating side, it's probably true that people can, out of anxiety or fear, tolerate things that shouldn't be tolerated. That's another version of a systemic process. So for some people, learning to skillfully not tolerate is the family leadership journey. Looks like we have another question. Now that my college-age child is home, how do I focus more on parenting myself than him? Parenting myself is an interesting phrase.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, hearing a lot of this from folks with the college age kids,
Yeah.
the challenge and how they're telling their parents to get out of their business and
Yeah.
wishing very badly that they could go and live somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah. And what is my role as a parent with a child at home from college who's had a greater level of independence and freedom? Yeah, I think that question, what is my role with this child right now? What degree of parenting is necessary and how, over what things?
Yeah, this parenting myself, and you put those in your slides too, that it is such a precious ability to just stop and be.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you're in a situation of concern, that is probably the parenting myself move that is, sort of most fundamental to family leadership,
Mm-hmm.
is the ability to stop and say, okay, can I achieve a state of poise right now
Mm-hmm.
without needing anything outside of me to change?
Mm-hmm.
And that from that position, one is a much better observer of what's really going on. I'm thinking of a situation where, with one of my kids, I just was on this run about how I wanted this thing to change, wanted it to change, wanted it to change. Wasn't working. The efforts to make it change weren't working. And then I don't know how it happened, but I maybe I went on a long hike up a mountain and I got to this kind of everything's okay space inside myself. And from there, it was so obvious I could see what I need to do is praise this kid for how well they're managing the thing that I was critical of. Complete 180 change.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it. And the response was amazing. I mean, win more flies with honey than vinegar. I mean, it sort of stimulated their resilience instead of stimulating me sort of being part of what they were up against, I think.
Yeah. So if you're describing a process in which parenting can come from a place of really choosing to step back and slow down and give yourself space to, whether it's to get calmer or to be able to think more about what's happening, to be able to get a different perspective, that's perhaps sort of along those lines of parenting oneself.
Yeah. So what else are you thinking of out there? These questions don't have to be sophisticated. What are the questions that this quarantine parenting puzzle raises for you about your family or somebody you know? Just welcome questions of any type, really.
Can I be heard?
Yeah, go ahead, Kim.
I'm sort of thinking about all of this. I don't really have a question. I'm just thinking about all of this from the position of being a parent of older children who have launched and are not, thankfully, having to come home right now. And my kids being 29 and 30. I think I'm sort of observing my desire to have a little more contact with them during this pandemic, and yet I can't define why, other than perhaps maybe a little elevated anxiety on my part, elevated sense of vulnerability. The good news is that that's not being reciprocated necessarily.
Why do you call that now? Why do you call that good news, Kim Ziegelman? And by the way, let me take a moment just to introduce Kim Ziegelman, who's also on the faculty of the Vermont Center for Family Studies, and will be one of the presenters who's going to tell a story at our June 5th symposium. A very interesting story about family leadership. So Kim Ziegelman, why do you say that it's fortunate?
Well, I think one of the things that I've been working on as my children have moved off into their own lives is freeing myself up from worrying about them. And when I'm doing it well, I have to say it feels so good. It's a load off. And when I'm not doing it well, I feel like the weight of the world has been placed on my shoulders, and it's very much all under my control, you know. And so I've just been paying attention to that urge within the past couple of months to gravitate more towards them. I can't even say it's about how are you managing, what are you doing, blah, 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 blah. It just feels very instinctive. It feels very natural that I would want to kind of connect with them more. Maybe it's in part because I can't, you know, I can't physically see them. But it's just been a very interesting thing to observe within myself.
Thank you for sharing those observations. One thing I was thinking about Kim and Kammy is that list that Kammy shared, there's a pretty predictable outcome of a person who is able to operate along the list of on the right side of her slide, which is that parent will be more attractive to the kid as they launch and as they move through life. And I think we all know this. It's really nice to be around people who aren't worried about you. People who are seeing your capacity rather than the things that you should be worried about. And so there's a kind of attractive force in differentiation that most parents really want to capture. I want to take a moment to just say a little bit more about our symposium as we're closing out here. Hope to see you here again next week. Again, same Zoom channel, and we'll be communicating by email about what the theme will be for next week. But we've got this event planned, and the people in these squares have been working hard at a series of very interesting presentations. You can see the list on our website. We've got a person who's going to be looking at Stoic philosophy in the light of Bowen theory, a presentation about neuroinflammation and its relationship to family process, and one about working with young adults as a clinician or a family therapist or social worker or pastoral counselor. So love to see you on June 5th. Probably going to be by Zoom. We'll keep you posted about that. Well, Kammy, any last thoughts?
No, is there a minute to share just this last
Yes, yeah.
quote? Oops, hang on. Oh. There we go. Let me just share this last oops. This last quote, I think, kind of sums up this discussion today, that the grown-up parent who really wants to be a loving resource to their child is prepared to work on themselves and not make a project out of their child. And it's from the book Growing Yourself Up by Jenny Brown, which is a lovely book.
Great note to end on, Kammy. Thank you so much for the work you put into this.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you all for being here. That was good. Take care, everyone.